Well, I feel like for me, femininity has always been super racialized in terms of my understanding of what it means to be a femme person. Because I feel like growing up, the only queer people I knew were like really granola, like just like hippie-ish white lesbians who just like were like not necessarily butch, but not necessarily femme either. Um, and so I feel like in coming into like my feminist and like appreciating it as like a valid expression of my gender and my like sexuality, I feel like I was very confused because I feel like white femininity was one thing and like black or brown or whatever femininity was very separate, and that I couldn't have both of them be together without like either not being queer or not being like black. And like I feel like that struggle, even like as an adult or as a person coming into adulthood, is still like so like going home and being queer or being queer and going home is like so crazy because it's when I came out to my mom, I think she was very confused because I was so feminine and all the black lesbians that we knew were like ultra masculine spectrum. And like just like how did it make sense that someone who could like be so incredibly feminine be so like queer? I feel like is something that I still like struggle with in seeing my family, even those who aren't like in this country per se. Just like I don't know, I don't think you can't really separate them.
I also feel like being a black femme like means that most people assume that I'm a little more masculine than I am, which makes things actually a lot more masculine than I am. Um, and I think like that's sometimes exacerbated by my personality, which like because of what we code as masculinity, right? Like directness, forcefulness, being adept at something, the ability to like organize well, to speak and like be recognized. And like I feel like for me, growing up knowing a lot of really really tough black femmes, like that's just par for the course for me. Like that's what adds to my feminist, not subtracts from it. But I think like being received in like a more like a white space, which is largely where I come from, like those things are coded almost exclusively with masculinity, and thus like makes people think of me as more masculine than I am.
Like a more masculine femme.
Yeah, as like not as delicate, like is not needing things, but then I feel like that's also counteracted by the fact that like I can't lift things up, I can't move things around, and like I can't walk like necessarily walk as fast as like there because of my mobility issues, I guess I should just really say, and because that I am disabled, I feel like people treat me as though like I'm weak, which is what people consider feminine in a lot of ways in the first place, So like I feel like it's constantly an interplay between what parts of me are seen as feminine and what parts are seen as masculine, and how like that ends up creating the image that people believe that I hold.
But also like this idea of the fierce femme and like being fearless all the time and like not, which I feel like is a very like oh you're so fierce all the time, and just like I feel like I get that a lot, and that's spectacular, and I think I am really fierce, but that doesn't mean that like I also feel like that is a very like hyperactive sort of thing that exists within queer communities, especially like queer activists realms, like having to always be this like force, which is like true but not necessarily all that like you desire and need.
Definitely. And like even more than that, like I think that like femme work, like the works that femmes do in communities are like consistent, are what our community like has grown on like in a lot of ways, but are like so easily written off, like we are often not recognized for the amount of work that we do in communities. And I think like that for me is the saddest part about being like a femme and being active and about.
And now for an interview with Karina Yazbek, who works at the Civil Liberties and Public Policy program here at Hampshire College.
So what makes femme a femme to you?
So I guess what makes, that question is so big, and my fear in answering that question, just as it's stated, is that I would be kind of dictating for other people what makes a femme. So can I reframe the question and say what makes me a femme?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm trying to kind of ground my thinking about and gender and speaking about it in kind of bold ways while still trying to be thoughtful is really, I'm trying to ground it in my experience. So I guess what makes me a femme is a queer politic. And in thinking about femme identity, personally, I don't divorce it from my sexuality. So, so being a queer person, meaning being open to being intimate with people of different genders and different sexes, and also being aware that there aren't just two genders, like not buying into the gender binary and knowing that that gender is really complicated. For me, I see it in three categories as identity, presentation or performance, and perception, so how I am perceived by other people. And those three things I know are impacted by race, class, age, size, ability, sexual history, and current sexual practice, and other things too, but those are kind of the big ones that I think about in terms of my gender identity, presentation, and how I'm perceived. So what makes me a femme is all of those things, and how I present myself. It's partly how I think about other people's gender in relation to my own gender, and how mine changes and how other people's change. And
Awesome. Okay. What does femme invisibility mean to you?
I think femme invisibility brings up for me walking down the street holding my boyfriend's hand, and I hear from the queer community that I should accept like the heterosexual privilege that I get being in that partnership, but I think it comes at the cost of passing, and what does that mean? It's about invisibility. It's about not being seen for more than just people's assumptions about who I am and what I do and how our relationship is structured. I mean, I don't know that it relates to gender, but I know that I think it makes my sexuality clear that we're in a non-monogamous relationship, so I sleep with women simultaneously, that I have this male partner, and so I think that just kind of hides all of that. That's
Do you think that femmes being with other femmes is a widely accepted practice, or do you think that there are pressures that come from our community that tear apart those partnerships, or do you think it's just like a general, well, we didn't link up kind of thing?
I don't think it's coincidence or like accident. I think there are pressures from like commercial media. We were talking about pornography earlier, and this idea of what the ultimate female girl situation is, and it's never butch femme, it's never trans boy femme, like it's always femme. So does then our community, are we just partnering in reaction to that? Honestly, when I first accepted that I was attracted to women, I thought, oh my God, have I just internalized all of society's messages about women as sex objects, and now I am, lusting after women too. Mm-hmm. And so, at some point, I had to integrate that into, a whole lot of other thinking about desire and sensuality and sexuality. And but I'm not sure. I think I'd have to have a lot more intentional conversations with more femmes about why we're not partnering with each